South, and I shall mute you all. But as always, you can unmute yourself. So, hope you're doing well, everybody. Thank you to those people. Several of you have been sending in questions by email, which is great. And it's very useful for me to have an idea of what sort of things you're thinking about. Obviously, on something like Zoom, it's not quite the same as being in a class and so on and so forth. You can always ask questions in the class. A lot of the questions have been around very interesting points of posture. And so one of the things I was thinking about, well, two things really I was thinking about doing. One is doing a kind of masterclass, as it were, on postural elements, which would actually be a class which had very few actual exercises in, but had a lot more time for discussion. And I'd probably kind of like make sure that stayed quite a small group, so that people could ask questions. The other thing is, and probably wouldn't do it the same. At the moment, I'm recording this, but because I'm spotlighted, the only person in the recording would be myself. And obviously, it's a bit difficult for people. If people feel uneasy about being recorded, to have those discussions, because it wouldn't happen. I wouldn't be able to spotlight myself. So I might do a separate one, just sort of summing up some of the ideas in the masterclass to go up on YouTube, so that you had something that you could revise. So it's very useful for me to have these questions and to know what it is you're asking about, because you can't see me as well, I can't see you as well. Quite often I can see what people are doing and what they might be doing wrong, but it's not nearly so easy on the screen. So do fire those questions at me, and I'll try and, probably not this week, but perhaps sometime next week, I'll arrange for the sort of specific masterclass on posture, and we can take it from there. But it's always worth thinking about posture. It's always something that is refined over and over again. It's also something that changes. I think ideas about posture change as we understand ourselves more, as we understand our bodies more, and as we understand Tai Chi more. One thing I'm very clear about with posture is that it's a process. And it's an ongoing process, rather than thinking, right, I've got to put myself in that position, otherwise it's not correct. For me, it doesn't work like that. And I've had times when I've had a teacher come and correct me and said, there you go, brilliant. And I'm standing there thinking, this doesn't feel good, kind of like, I'm not going to be able to maintain this. And so it might be, it's useful from that kind of process to think, okay, this is what I want to be able to do, but it's not. That's not the same as being able to do it right now. And I'm always mindful of a quote from Tai Chi teacher who I knew a little, called Paul Crompton, when he said that learning Tai Chi is like wearing a pair of shoes. Only it's us that get used to Tai Chi, not it's us that wear in, our bodies that wear in. And I think that's a useful thing to bear in mind. If you went out and bought a new pair of shoes, you wouldn't necessarily go on a long march with them until they'd softened up a little bit and you got used to wearing them, and they'd adapted to your feet. So think of it like that. But basics in terms of posture, and this is quite a good exercise for playing with them, because you do get very quick feedback. We want an alignment with the pull of gravity. We want to feel that rather than being pulled forwards or backwards or sideways, we're being pulled straight down into our feet. So get the camera angle right. It should be there. There, I imagine a line going down from the crown of my head, through the middle of my ear, through my shoulder, down the side of my body, the side of the knee, to the ankle. And then when I turn, obviously, you know, the shoulder's moving, that line is no longer going to remain straight. If I stick to it's got to go through the shoulder. But if I just imagine the line is there, what I'm doing now is I'm moving gently to either side of that line. So we have this idea in Tai Chi called central equilibrium. And the thing about central equilibrium is it's like a gyroscope on a piece of string, whizzing around. It's not a lack of movement, but it doesn't actually do very much other than go round and round. So to do most of the movements, we move out of that central equilibrium. When we've got that line with the pull of gravity, and that's actually very important. It's difficult to do most of the rest of this postural stuff if we haven't got that basic idea that there is a balance point, a line that we can imagine. And what we want to be able to do, ideally, is to take that balance point slightly forwards. Now you see here, I'm angling slightly, and that's going to happen. Now, this is exaggerated by the way. My response to that will be this. This is where my hips drop back. Now, if I come a bit closer, you won't see my head, but you'll see my knees. In this position, my knees are over the balls of my feet. And what happens is, as I drop back, they remain there. So the knees flex. And that dropping back of the hips and the flexion of the knees and a kind of loosening in the back are the sort of main physical elements that allow for the rooting down, which is this feeling of your center of gravity or your pelvis dropping down. This is the position that we want to be in. This is the position that we want to walk around in, to go down the shops in, not somewhere like this and kind of stomping around like that. The deeper postures, apart from anything else, there's other factors as well, but they actually help us to be comfortable in this position. And crucially, we should not be tightening our knees. Our knees should point in the same direction as our toes. So we're often told the feet are parallel. And for many people they are, but for many people also the feet will turn out slightly. If you notice that, then don't strain against it. Gradually you can start to bring the toes in, but it's important that you don't end up doing something like this or twisting the knees out or something like that. And don't have your feet too far turned out, because now your knees will twist around. So try and moderate that angle and keep your knees in line with the toes. Again, I'm going to come a little bit closer so that you can see my knees, get the feet right. When I turn, I try and keep my knees in the same place. I don't want to do this, because that twists the knees. And there's a natural tendency for the knees to twist in when we do this, and the response is just to roll out. If that doesn't make sense, then don't worry, give it time. As I said, all of these things are very subtle and take time. The interesting thing is that on top of that detail, when we do this particular movement, when it all comes together, we do get a loosening in the hips. So if, for instance, in this position, I'm turning like this, if I pull my knees back, suddenly I can feel a tightening there, and it's just not as comfortable. So there's an element to understanding posture that is, shall we say, intuitive. It's to do with the feel of the movement. And I'm not saying that we don't need the detail. That is quite useful, but leads us to an understanding of the posture. So we use a lot of images, a lot of ideas, which are there to help to guide us. And in particular, it's important to realize that when we talk about straight lines in the body, it's imaginary. As I've said before, they're like grid lines on a map, or if you were going to draw something, you might use straight lines to get to sort out the perspective or something like that. But they're not the real thing. So we imagine, as I said, this line from the side going down there, and from the front, you wouldn't see it go to the head, but you've got shoulders, hips, feet, ankles. You imagine the midline going through there, and you can also imagine cross lines, the hips, the shoulders, and front to back at the hips as well. So that is when that line is tilted backwards. If I just bring my weight forwards and drop the hips back, you'll see my hands have leveled off a bit. So just ideas to play with, but always very gently. So with your feet in what we think of as the parallel position, even if they're not quite parallel, rolling your weight forwards and backwards. And this really helps our judgment, that sense, that intuitive sense of what's going on in our body, because there will be a point where everything changes. We move from a very elastic quality to one that feels a bit stiffer, a bit tighter. We lose the flow of the movement. We lose that sense that we're not having to strain. It's not that there's no effort, but there's no straining to remain upright and to move. In between those points, we have this lovely fluidity of movement. So one thing to think about is, when you're doing these movements, they should always have this fluidity. And if they haven't, it's usually an indication that somewhere along the line, we've lost that posture. And the routine, the mantra almost, is you lose the posture, you bring your attention back to your feet, your hips, you think about those lines in the body, it sorts itself out, you feel great. 5 seconds later, you lose it again, you go back and so on and so forth. It sounds quite arduous to start off with. And we need to be careful we don't get totally obsessed by that. But over a period of time, it just becomes natural. If you drive a car or ride a bike, you're constantly altering the steering, changing the angle of your body if you're on a bike, and so on and so forth. You don't have to think about it. You don't think, right, now I've got to go a little bit to the right. Oh, I've lost it now. I've got to go back to the left. Now it just happens. And our bodies will naturally do that. And what we're doing is giving them the space and the training to enable them to do it better. Bring your hands out to the sides. It's always problematical when we bring our arms into the movement. Because if we overuse them, if they go too far in any direction, then the tendency will be for them to pull the body offline. So how we use our arms, how we understand our arms building in Tai Chi, has a massive influence on maintaining our posture. For instance, I can now do this, and I've got my weight moving forwards and backwards nice and easy. No problem. I put my arms out here, and actually, now there's a bit of a problem because my arms are out here and I'm kind of wobbling around. So use this exercise also to train you to recognize how the arms will always follow the body. Don't have an idea that your arms should go a long way out. Rather move, let your weight come to rest. Notice how far your arms move. Go back, let your weight come to rest at the front part of your heel. Notice how long it takes for your arms to stop moving. And then as your weight comes forwards and you find that little balance point, let your hips sink back. So now the challenge is, can we maintain those qualities while we're actually moving, which of course is quite tricky. So here, depending on how your knees are, your hips will go back more, you go down more. In the process of doing that, if your pelvis tucks under, you're fine. If your back is stiff, it will pull you back. So try and just soften in the lower part of your back. Give yourself time for all of that to happen as well. Both time within the class itself, but also time of sort of how long you've been doing Tai Chi for and how regularly you're able to practice. Here, the distance that my hands move is roughly between my shoulders and my hips, a little bit less probably. And in terms of vertical movement, apart from where it's obvious, that's about as high and as low as your hands will get. Well, there are obvious exceptions to that, but not as many as you might think. When we come to the wild goose, same thing, except our arms are out to the sides. Notice though that my elbows move first. So it might be better to think in terms of your elbows than your hands. Because if your hands do go, if your fingers end up slightly above shoulder height as they have done there, slightly below the hips, that's not really an issue. But what we don't want to do for this exercise is this. Or this. This is still with that same push up and drop down to our feet and our hips. And you notice also here, see where my hand is there, there's my shoulder, there's my hand slightly in front. It's not back here. Again, there's only a few moments in certain exercises when that would happen. Now, parting the clouds. Here, obviously, the hands will go up higher, we know that. But actually, if you look at the elbows, they're not much higher than shoulder height. Here they've gone a little bit higher, but still not a great deal. And what will happen is, I'll show you with one arm, there, this is exaggerated. The elbow comes out, and then it drops down. And when it drops down, it's like a lever, levering the arm up. So it's almost like in the process of doing this, somebody's come along and just put a hand there and stopped your elbow, but because you're still pushing up, there's a movement through the arms and the hands carry on. This should make us aware of a process, a movement, a line of movement within the body. Starting in our feet, coming up to our knees and our hips, to our shoulders, to our elbows, which get pushed out, and finally to the fingers that really only go higher when the elbows drop. Now, just do this with one hand. And in your mind, I want you to change the movement from a circle, circling upwards and downwards, to a straight line, but not change anything else. So essentially what's going to happen is this. Oh, look, my hand's gone up. And so it's like the circle slowly becomes straighter, and we end up with dragon plucks the stars from the sky. Again, my elbow isn't a huge distance above my shoulder. And what happens is exaggerated again, elbow drops, hand goes up. Now switch sides. Try this again, actually, just to remind you. It's almost like the top of your arm, your forearm, is levered out from the elbow. Gradually getting straighter until we've got the actual movement. Dragon plucks the stars from the sky. And then alternating from side to side. But again, if I show you from the side, you'll see that my hand remains in front of my body. I'll point out the exercises where there's a little bit of a change there. As I say, there aren't that many of them. Remember that there can often be a tendency when we reach up to also lean back. I don't know why, actually. It doesn't seem like a survival trait, but there you go. But I'm sure we've all had the experience trying to put something up on a high shelf and suddenly feeling yourself falling backwards a little bit. And so, I don't know, we arch the back, and it seems like a cruel thing to do to our backs when we're lifting something up. At the moment, I'm doing this with sort of visible rise and fall in my hips, but remember, we could also do this without the external movement, but with the sort of echo internally. Do one more on each side. Good, and now, both hands. So here, once again, with this particular movement, my hands go just a little above my head. I'd emphasize the little. Keep doing this one. You can just about see some space between my hands, oops, and my head. And once again, as before, my hands are in front of my body, not pulled back. Knees are still slightly flexed, hips are still dropping back. Don't go to this. If you do this, you strain against the pull of gravity, you block that upward movement. Effectively, there's no kind of energy moving through the body, or at least you're losing that part of the energy. When I do the sideways movement, so we're going to that one now, my hands come up, my elbows drop, and I push out there. So there's my shoulder, there's the palm of my hand. My fingers may be a little bit above my shoulders, but it's not like that. It still should be there. If you look at it from the side, shoulder, there's the wrist. Fingers are a little bit above, but the elbows below. And the hands are in front of the body. So there's very little deviance from the basic principles, and even when there is, it's done very carefully and in very particular circumstances. So here, this is a difficult angle to show, but when I push out and I turn, if you look at this position, I'll just shuffle around. My hand is still in the same position. In other words, I haven't pulled my hand back there. What I've done is I've turned my body. So my hand may be going behind my hip, depends how far I turn, but it's not going behind my shoulder. One of the things that used to be said, not so much now actually, but is that the chest should have a concave feel. I think one of the reasons it's not mentioned a great deal is because a lot of people found, as I did, that it was just overdone. You'd find yourself with a room full of people deliberately hunching over. So it look, my rear arm looks as though it's dropping down. That's the angle of the camera, but they're both at the same height, or as close to as I can get. So putting those four movements together. So between the hips and shoulders, we can still imagine, to begin with at least, those straight lines. They'll get a little bit from the front. From the side, the line between shoulder and hip will curve a little bit as we turn, of course. But basically, the alignment and the feel of the alignment will remain. Now, you all know this exercise well enough to play about with it a little bit. So what I'm going to do is to ask you to very carefully, deliberately do it wrong. So what we can do is, if we start off, as you push your hands out, deliberately pull them back, and you'll feel a tightening in your chest and your back. It's quite uncomfortable. When we push up, just go up much higher, and see, eventually you'll start to stiffen up, and so on and so forth. Play about with where the boundaries, or what we think of as the soft movement is in Tai Chi. One more round. And changing, curving out, elbow really quite soft. And again, your hand in front of your body. Once again, become a little bit above the shoulder. So your hand is still in front of the body, and if I'm comfortable from this point on, I get to here and I turn. And I don't pull my hand across my body anymore. It still goes down in the center line. Good, and then switch sides. And have to turn. Rowing a boat in the middle of the lake. Very carefully, especially if your back's feeling a bit tight. And this is where we have a big movement in the hips and the pelvis. And we come closer. Yeah, here the pelvis tilts and drops back, and that brings my head up. My pelvis won't move easily if I'm tight around my hips. If I'm pulling my belly in, I'm tight in my lower back. Which is what happens if I sort of glibly pull my belly in. I come up and I'm sort of stuck here, and that's going to happen. And that movement in the pelvis is what happens in our normal posture as our hips sink back. Just it's very small. Good. And then come back to standing. So again, just try for a moment to imagine those lines going through your body. Middle, sides, vertically, maybe horizontally at your hips, both forwards and backwards and left and right. Same thing at the shoulders. Shake out. Good. It is always problematical to maintain posture in movement. So however much work we do static, standing in one position or sitting in one position, we're always going to find ourselves having to adapt slightly when we start to make any kind of movement. The image I sometimes give to people is, and I've done this, especially it's quite interesting if I go down to London for a Tai Chi seminar, and you all come out the hall, and usually there's a few of you and you've got to know people. You get on the tube together, you go and stand on the tube, we're just doing Tai Chi. So we're all standing there, it's fine. Well, we don't need to hold on to anything. And then the doors close and the train stops moving, and suddenly we're all like that. As soon as you introduce the idea of movement, it becomes trickier. And that's where our awareness becomes so very important, along with those mechanisms within the body that are really attuned to what they call proprioception, which is keeping you upright, keeping you stable. Tiny little movements for the most part. Your inner ear, or the middle ear rather, is important for that. We've got these little bones in the ear. It's why if we get a blocked ear or an ear infection, we can feel a little bit dizzy. There are mechanisms all through the body for doing this, but a key area is this area of the hips and the pelvis. If, for instance, I just stand and I deliberately, say, pull my pelvis back, suddenly, can you see what I'm doing? It's that. So these are constant micro movements, if you like, very fine motor movements that the body makes the whole time, hopefully. So when we do these exercises, we're actually training those. We're making sure that we're using those, because what we don't want to do is to tighten up to stop ourselves falling over, or to hold a posture. We want the body to feel it can hold that posture, make the adjustments without us having to consciously interfere. So go back to sinking your hips down. You will find this is strong in the muscles of your legs, and just gently moving from side to side. Think about how you're making this movement. Again, I'm going to come closer and I'm going to go into a wider stance. And you can do this if you like, but it's because I want you to see what's actually going on. So I move my weight across and I drop into this leg. Now this leg compresses and expands. We know that from other exercises. What I want to do is to use that expansion to push me across. What I don't want to happen is this. I don't want the knee to lock. So the knee will still be slightly bent at the end of it. So whether you're in a wider stance or not, that's what should be happening. And as you move your weight, see if you can remember where you found that point of balance in your feet. And that's the point that you're looking for. Now then, I had a little stick out here. It's not going to work. So, effectively, what I want to imagine is that if I'm standing on the stick, if that's where, if I'm standing on the stick where my point of balance is, what I'm doing is I'm moving along that line of the stick. What I don't want to do is to go back from that stick or forwards from that stick. So you imagine, I sometimes imagine it like two little holes in the ground, or if you think of a pool table, a billiard table, if you're going to play billiards, you would line up, or golf, or whatever. You've got a ball, you want a straight line to the hole. Here's where the ball is. The hole is in the other foot. We go across, and it's not very big. So it's a 60% in each leg. So there's always going to be a temptation to go like this, to get more movement. And this again is where we have to understand not just posture, but how we produce the movement and how the movement builds. Hold your hands in front of you, and your hands will be moving a little bit, and you just turn. So add in the turning moves your hands more. You don't have to strain in your shoulders. You don't have to extend your arms out, although we will be doing that in a moment. And if you then go across into one foot, raise the opposite heel, that allows the turn to come round a little bit more. So I'll line myself up over this leg. I don't lean out anymore. I simply turn. And that allows my arms to move. I've done nothing with my arms apart from hold them in one place for the moment. And this is crucial. I think probably after just the sheer effort and the aching legs that are involved in dropping the hips back, the single biggest problem we find in Tai Chi, and particularly if we're thinking about posture, is that we move the arms too much. And we're going to go into hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. Your hand comes up and your arm grows out of the shoulder. And then down. And here, my hand comes to shoulder height, hence the name, hitting the ball in front of the shoulder. And again, if I can find the correct angle, yeah, there you go. You see, my hand is actually straight out from the shoulder. It hasn't come across the body. But what's happened is my body's turned. So my upper body's turned is what I should, well, I suppose the leg is turned. So we maintain central equilibrium, or an awareness of equilibrium within our body. We remain aware of the flow and the feel of the movement, the sensations and the feedback we're getting from the body. And if they're not the same as when we did that little exercise swaying in the river, or when we were swinging our arms around, it's wrong. And the first thing that everybody, however long you've been doing Tai Chi, should be looking to when they detect that sort of disruption in the flow, or however you care to think about it, however you experience it, is to bring your attention back to your feet, then your hips, and so on and so forth. So from that point of view, it's not complicated. Hips dropping back still. Long feeling building through your back. One more time. And come back. And give yourself a moment. And this is the other thing. Our posture is not fixed. We're not machines. And even if we were, I mean, I ride a bike regularly, and it's great. You do some work on the bike, you pump the tires up, think, yeah, it feels great. And a couple of weeks later, suddenly think, oh, it's time to pump the tires up again. You have to maintain things. And in the process of movement, in the process of doing an exercise, you will lose some of the elements that you built up. Take the time to come back. It's not a rush, it's not a race. So when we come back to the stand-in or the sit-in and just the awareness of the body, this is when we come back to Zhongding, central equilibrium, not just in our body, but in our mind as well. And there is always a rhythm in Tai Chi that we come back to that, because the movement will expand out and we'll come back. And in that moment of coming back, when we come back just for a split second, we come back into Zhongding, then we go out again, and then we come back. So that also has implications for our posture, apart from anything else. Now have 1 foot forwards. So once again, let me get the stick. This is like a square. You could imagine there There'll be one side of the square. That's not very good, is it? Let me line my stuff up. There we get the idea. And in fact, the movement is going to be like that. It's going to be along that diagonal line of the square. It's a little bit long, but just so you can see. And again, from point to point, I'm going to go there. And then I'm going to go there. If I go there, I'm going to fall over. Again, it should feel comfortable. Now, those of you who do a Tai Chi form, you need to get better at this. Yeah? I don't need to tell you, I don't need to look at you. I don't need to study what you're doing. I don't need to know anything about your Tai Chi experience. I can say it unequivocally, you need to get better at this. We all need to get better at this, in particular if you're doing a Tai Chi form. So the transfer of the weight in the Tai Chi movements and in the exercises we're going to come to is crucial. It's important for other reasons as well, but from the point of view of good Tai Chi, it's one of the clearest things. Shake out. If you want to wind up a friend who does Tai Chi, tell them they look double weighted. I shouldn't say that really, should I? Same thing on the other side. So the terms used to cover this exercise, this process, are single weighted and double weighted. I think they're probably unfortunate terms. I don't think single weighted is a good term. We rarely have all of our weight on one leg. But if you look at the old writings in Tai Chi, they'll talk about double weighted being sluggish. So actually what single weighted is, and it brings us back to this awareness of what's going on in the body, is a posture and a way of moving that allows us a freedom of movement that isn't sluggish. Once again, I'll show you from the side. Camera right there. Notice where my knees come closer. There. See where my knee is? Above the ball of my foot. Not there because I fall over. Some people, in fact, say the ankle. I say the ball of the foot. On the back leg, more difficult to show you again, but the back foot is turned out, and again here, my knee is above the ball of my foot. When you go forwards and back, so the empty leg, first of all, when you go back, don't lock this knee out. And you see, that can be very tight. It's still pushed forwards. Likewise, this one, don't lock the knee out. It pushes your hips up anyway. The second thing is that although it's not as vital to have the knees in line with the toes when the weight's largely not in the leg, it's still useful to be able to do that. So what you could do is go forwards, look back at the ball of your back foot, and you should see your knee in between. It may have rolled in a little bit. That's not unusual. Shake out. Now, once again, that movement is going to move the arms. It's the principal energy that will move the arms. The analogy I always think of is like riding a bicycle. You ride a bike, it doesn't matter how good your bike is, it doesn't matter how good a cyclist you are, if you don't pedal, you ain't going anywhere. So, you know, if you don't move the weight, nothing else is going to happen with these exercises. With fisherman cast a net, for once, for a few moments, the hands are behind the body. Not so much that you cause the back or the chest to tighten, but enough just to open these muscles here at the front of the chest, which will then close. And then back. What I see a great deal of actually in these sessions is I see the top half of somebody's body, and when I see them doing fisherman cast and net, I see their hands. That means their hands are out there somewhere, which is pulling me forwards. You may not notice it, but actually it's the fisherman casting the net. It's there. What it is, if I can find something appropriate, there's never anything around when I need it. Okay, you have to pretend this is a hedgehog, would you believe? But you're gonna, but not a real one, incident. What I'm going to do is this. It's going to go forwards. It's not going to go up. So that's what you have to be thinking of. So 1 foot forwards and fisherman cast a net. Again, exactly how far is difficult to predict unless you're the person doing the movement, in which case the attention that you pay to your body is your best guide. Fisherman casting net. So why I think this is such a good exercise, because it really encapsulates so much about what we're trying to build into the more complex exercises. And so it's a very informative exercise, this one. And it has this lovely flow to it when it's done well. The more complex the exercise, the more likely you are to lose some of the basic elements. Now, if we change from this to pushing a wave, our hands come here. We don't want our elbows to go behind the body, because at this point you would lose any kind of connection that's going to offer you any sort of like strength. So what will happen is, here I exaggerate, the elbows come out and again the chest opens. So the movement is a forwards push, but the elbows, the elbows are squeezing in. It's like you've got a big tube of toothpaste here, and you're going to squeeze it and push the toothpaste out in the direction of the arms. One more time. Don't overextend your arms. Feet, hands. Not out there. See how my shoulders are coming forwards? And then on the other side. The movement pushing a wave, unlike fisherman cast a net, is a movement that you find in the Tai Chi forms, and they're all martial movements. And if you were pushing somebody with any experience and you went slightly over, they'd just pull you over. We train for that, would you believe? In a very nice way, but we do, you know, we want to be aware of somebody else's alignments. We have a little bit more scope for movement with fisherman cast a net. And then pushing a wave. One more time. And good. Put your hands together. And tapping over your face. Over your head and neck. And down to one shoulder. The other side. Once you're back, around your hips. Light on your belly and the upper part of your chin. So when we do Embrace Tiger, Return to Mountain, we have this idea of coming back to something again. We're also coming back very specifically to the basic posture, this basic central equilibrium, Zhongding as it's known in Chinese. It's very, very simple. The ideas behind Tai Chi are very natural and very simple to us, but tend to be very difficult. I remember reading something by a teacher I've been fortunate enough to work with, Grandmaster Chen Xiaowang. Grandmaster Chen is standard bearer for the Chen family Tai Chi, which is the oldest style of Tai Chi. I mean, he's in his 70s now, but he started when he was like that high. And it was interesting reading this article because he said two things that really struck me. One was that the movements that he does, the forms start like this. Looks a bit odd. Get the camera angle right. That's probably better. You sink down, your feet are together, you raise the heel, you step out, and you come. That's the start of a 25-minute form, 25 minutes, half an hour, with some leaps and jumps and complex movements in and things like that. Grandmaster Chen describes it as the single most difficult movement of the entire form. He should know what he's talking about. So coming into that posture for him is the most difficult thing of all. He also says that when we step out, feet should be parallel, toes should be pointing forwards or slightly turned out. It's an acknowledgement that we can't be too rigid about posture because we're all slightly different. Yeah, so you know, bear that in mind always with posture. But as I said, I will be doing some stuff with a bit more detail about posture and some ideas to play with, less actual exercises. So please do get back to me if there's points that you would like to see covered. Please do come back to me at one point. But for now, just let your hips sink down, embrace tiger, return to mountain. One more time. And stand. Thank you very much, everybody. Has anybody got any questions before we finish? You have to unmute yourself. I can't do it anymore. I don't know why. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. So have a think about things, and do, as I say, do keep the questions coming. That's great. So thank you very much, everybody. See you soon, I hope.
Thanks, Mike. That was really useful. Bye.
Bye.